A shock in the Big Apple as Manhattan's new district attorney announces his office will not be seeking prison sentences for a whole range of really serious crimes. It's a tough blow for a city that's already struggling to keep crime under control. DA is just the latest reminder the people who lead our public institutions are often useless bureaucrats who don't give a damn about you. Let's get into that in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. The crime wave across the country should result in Democrats thinking about crime and justice differently. But no, they're just hoping to avoid political consequences by walking away from the defund the police slogan and some of those actions. But what about on the prosecutorial end of things? What about those progressive prosecutors that George Soros loves to help back financially and put in place in major cities that then have, unsurprisingly to anyone who's paying attention, massive spikes in shootings, violent crime, rapes, you name it, right? Democrats are bad on the issue of public safety. That much is obvious. But in a place like New York City, where we've already gone through, in living memory, cycles of extreme crime and a tremendous turnaround thanks to Rudy Giuliani and the work of the NYPD, you would think that they would know, the Democrats, a little bit better. The incoming mayor, Eric Adams, or the new mayor, I should say, has declared that he will back police. But what about prosecutors? The new district attorney, Alvin Bragg, put out a statement that has a lot of people saying, what the heck is going on? Quote, the DA will not seek a carceral sentence, that means prison time, other than for homicide or cases involving the death of a victim, a Class B violent felony in which a deadly weapon caused serious physical injury, domestic violence felonies, sex offenses, public corruption, rackets, or major economic crimes. Wait a second. That seems to leave a lot of open territory there. You're not going to seek any prison time. Mind you, a carceral sentence would just mean that someone's actually going to serve real time. So, okay, let's think about this. What are some crimes that are not on the list of carceral sentences? Armed robbers. This was his statement on it. Armed robbers who use guns or other deadly weapons to stick up stores and businesses will be prosecuted only for petty larceny, a misdemeanor, provided no victims were seriously injured and there's no genuine risk of physical harm to anyone. This is psychopathic. I mean, this guy is out of his mind. He's the new district attorney in the city of New York. I mean, how can you look at this and not say this is going to result in more people engaged in armed robbery, more people being harmed, their stores being ransacked, the people of New York City being terrified? It's disgusting, but it's just yet again another representation of what has happened, which is that you have left-wing ideologues who have burrowed not just into many of our bureaucracies in this country, but run them now. The machinery of the organized left isn't just a function of community organizers and, women's march rallies. No, the machinery of the left now runs prosecutors' offices in major cities, runs police departments, runs the entire city actually now from the mayor's office on down. It's true in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, you name it, Washington, D.C. And what about our health bureaucracies? Well, the New York State Department of Health has announced that it's going to prioritize non-whites when distributing treatments such as monoclonal antibody treatment and antiviral pills. This is a quote. Non-white race or Hispanic Latino ethnicity should be considered a risk factor as long-standing systemic health and social inequities have contributed to an increased risk of severe illness and death from COVID-19. This is outrageous. I mean, this is racism in the healthcare system as implemented by a massive public bureaucracy. So now they're going to just straight up make determinations about who will get life-saving drugs, not based upon the need of the individual as a human being per se, but what skin color are you? If you're white, you might have to be at the back of the line, or Asian at the back of the line for life-saving treatment, even if you're deathly ill, because got to make sure there's more equity in how we distribute monoclonal antibodies. Okay, that's terrifying. But yet again, another bureaucracy that is betraying the very people that it is supposed to serve because of left-wing ideology, because these are a bunch of Marxists. These are a bunch of commies. Let's be honest about that. Oh, and speaking of commies and Marxists, the teachers union, one of the only organizations in America that you can say, without exception, doesn't care about the very thing it pretends to care about really at all, which is the best interest of children. Teachers unions are Democrat vote and fundraising machines that are meant to make sure that adults can get, on the public system, of course, meaning getting paid as public servants, the best benefits and deal possible for themselves. And Democrat politicians are all too happy to use tax dollars to buy their votes and support. Well, that results in teachers unions feeling like they can flex their muscles and get away with a whole lot. Here's a headline from Chicago right now. Chicago public schools have canceled classes after the Chicago Teachers Union has voted for remote learning. This is appalling. But this is showing you exactly what the teachers unions, whether it's Chicago or anywhere else, because remember, they shut down all over the country. Public schools shut down all over the country. And that was, not as much everywhere, but there were efforts to shut down, certainly in every blue state. It's disgusting what they've done. They don't care about kids. They want their members to get their full pay to stay home and do remote learning, which is not even really learning in the first place. As we know, it doesn't occur. It means that children are going to fall behind. But the Chicago Teachers Union, they don't care. They don't give a crap about your kids. They just don't. This is about adults getting what they want. This is about adults being lazy and throwing their political muscle around so they can continue to be lazy, inept, and oh so terrified of Omicron. So anyone who owns a sandwich shop or an auto body shop, they go to work, but the teachers can't do that. It's too dangerous. They tweeted out from the Chicago Teachers Union that the results of tonight's citywide electronic ballot are in. Starting tomorrow, all CTU members in CPS schools should be working remotely. The result of tonight's vote was 73% in favor of the remote work-only job action. This is appalling. And even the left-wing mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, is doing a terrible job, no surprise. Here's what she says about this situation. Watch.
Regarding schools, let me say this. One of the things that doesn't get reported on in coverage of saber rattling by teachers union leadership is the devastating effect that remote learning had on our children and on their families. We know that learning loss was profound. We know that there was huge gaps in achievement. We know that the mental health and trauma issues of our students was real. And we know that it was devastating for families, particularly those families where the parents couldn't afford not to work. So there's a lot of different component parts that go into it. But fundamentally, we know our schools are safe. Our schools are not the source of significant spread.
She's right. Schools are safe. Why are the teachers' unions betraying the kids? Because they don't care. And they know the Democrat Party is going to let them get away with it. Where's Biden on this one? Lecturing the unvaccinated, of course, because that's the real threat. And the insurrection! All right, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been permanently banned from Twitter after the social media platform claims she posted misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines. The move has reignited the debate over big tech and its ability to censor dissenting opinions. The Congresswoman joins us to give her side of the story. We come back. But first, I want to talk to you about protecting your online data. A lot of companies promise you that privacy is guaranteed. We know that's not true. That's why you need a new privacy and cybersecurity application tool called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure uses proprietary encryption and is offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communications based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech American platforms out there. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. It costs only $5 for the Messenger, only $10 for the Messenger and email combo package. Go to secure.com and take back your privacy today. That's S-E-K-U-R, secure.com. Use promo code BUCK for 25% off. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is coming up next. Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been permanently suspended from Twitter after what the social media platform has called a violation of its COVID-19 misinformation policy. The ban came over the New Year's weekend shortly after a January 1st tweet in which the Congresswoman wrote, quote, "Before COVID, reported deaths from vaccines were taken seriously and dangerous vaccines were stopped. After COVID, extremely high amounts of COVID vaccine deaths are ignored. As you can see, the statement was accompanied by data from the CDC itself. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene joins me now after her exile from Twitter. Congresswoman, thanks for being here.
Hi, Buck. Thanks so much for having me on.
So first, just tell us, what happened here? Did they even inform you that this was going? Did you get a warning? Was this your first time? I know that the Twitter commies don't feel like they have to actually be responsive to people in general, but how did this whole thing go down?
Well, no, it just happened. It was really interesting. As a matter of fact, I had tweeted those VAERS statistics and other factual statistics about COVID-19. I would think, tweeting something on the cdc.gov website would be considered factual, and I can't imagine how they find that COVID-19 misinformation. I had done that the day before, but it was the next morning. I had just tweeted about an hour before, arguing policy with Dan Crenshaw. He had talked about using FEMA to do mass COVID testing for this Omicron virus that causes sneezes and runny noses and a cough, kind of like a common cold. And I had disagreed with him that no, we don't need to use FEMA to do mass COVID testing for President Joe Biden. And no, we don't need to send FEMA into hospitals. We need to hire back the unvaccinated healthcare workers that worked so hard on the front lines when people were really dying from this Chinese virus from the CCP. But it was after that, it was about an hour after that tweet that I had argued with him on policy that Twitter kicked me off. And then I looked in and I had all these flagged tweets, and they sent me the lovely email of my permanent Twitter suspension.
Is there a review process or some kind of appeal that you can go through? Do you want to go through it? Are you considering legal action? And you're a sitting member at Congress tweeting about an area of not just public concern, probably the greatest area of public concern right now in America and around the world, which is COVID and our response to it and the vaccines and all of these issues. So what now? What do you think are the options or the steps that you want to take, given that you have been deplatformed for political reasons?
Well, Buck, this is very serious. It's extremely serious, and the entire Republican conference needs to take it that way. I'm still looking into all of my options. I'm still talking with my attorney. I haven't submitted any of the review process with Twitter. Twitter has come out and announced publicly that my suspension is permanent. And so I'm still finding out what my legal options are, and I think I have many. But here's the real concern, Buck. I was elected to serve as a representative, a member of Congress. Twitter was not elected. No one appointed them to be the judge of information and misinformation. No one elected them to serve or represent people like I was elected to serve over 700,000 tax-paying Americans for Georgia's 14th district, and I'm very proud of that. And Twitter is completely out of line, but I think people need to realize what's happening. Twitter attacks only one kind of Republican. That's me and President Donald J. Trump. They don't like our political speech, and they don't like the people that we represent, because Twitter also kicks off those same type of Republicans. These are people that believe in putting America first. These are people that want to make America great again. These are people that have strong, passionate beliefs about our Constitution and defending all of our rights. And you can see that the loudest people, President Trump and myself, even though we are elected to serve, or President Trump was at the time, and I am now, Twitter still kicked us off. So I think we need to take a harder look at what is Twitter really, and how is Twitter allowed to actually attack people working and serving in our government, the government of the United States of America. And what does that mean? So I think we have a lot of work to do with Twitter. They have a lot to look forward to in the future, and Section 230 definitely won't be one of them, but I think they have graver concerns, and those are the things that I'm talking about with my colleagues and my attorneys, and there'll be more to come in the future.
I know you are on the alternative platform to Twitter, Getter, which is devoted to free speech. I'm also on Getter, full disclosure for the audience. But you, on Getter, not Twitter, wrote this: when Maxine Waters can go to the streets and threaten violence on Twitter, Kamala and Ilhan can bail out rioters on Twitter, and chief spokesperson for the terrorist IRGC can tweet "Morning Soleimani," but I get suspended for tweeting theirs statistics. Twitter is an enemy to America and can't handle the truth. It does seem remarkable, Congresswoman, what they will allow to stay on that platform today even.
Yes, that's what I mean about asking, what is Twitter really? What is their role and what are their intentions? And I think it's deeply concerning. And this is something that we are really going to have to take serious here in Congress as lawmakers and as a body that provides oversight over everything for our country and our government. This is something that we've got to look into, because you see, when Twitter suspends people for trespassing or breaking German law, but you're doing that to American citizens on the Twitter platform, well, what does that mean, really? And then what is Twitter's relationship with the CCP? Do they have any type of data sharing, or is there anything spying on American citizens? I think we have a lot of questions to ask Twitter. And if Twitter is so concerned about my political speech, when I'm talking about how we should be taking deaths reported on VAERS that is on the cdc.gov website very seriously, and we should be investigating those deaths instead of enforcing mandates through OSHA into people's private companies, causing people to lose their jobs and not be able to provide for their families, I think we have very serious issues, and our country is definitely on the wrong track. So I think that we have a lot to look forward to with Twitter and those who serve on the board. I think that we also should look into which Democrats and which Republicans they donate to, and why are some elected leaders' political speech, the ones that they want on there, versus others' political speech, like mine and President Trump's, the type of political speech they don't want on their platform. I don't think it's about information or misinformation. I think there's more to it.
Congressman, before we let you go, just want to know if you are confident, and if you could share that confidence one way or the other with this audience, that if the Republicans take a majority in the House in the next election, that there will be action on this issue of big tech. Are you confident that they have the backbone and the will to do it?
I certainly hope so, Buck, because I'm one of those Americans that's sick and tired and fed up with it. I was very disappointed that a Republican-controlled Congress didn't do anything about it the first time around. And I think this time around, Republican voters need to hold Republican elected leaders. They need to hold their feet to the fire and force Republicans to do it once we take back the majority. You see, Buck, the problem is I'm really tired of even my own colleagues saying and talking things on their interviews and on their campaign ads, but not actually following through with action. And so that's the type of member of Congress I'm going to be. I'm going to fight back against the Democrats' policies, but I'm also willing to fight those in my own party that won't do what they say they're going to do and actually aren't who they say they are. So I think we need a Republican-controlled majority in conference that's actually going to work for the American people and follow through on the promises we make.
Congresswoman, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Buck.
Manhattan's progressive new district attorney, Alvin Bragg, just gave a green light for anarchy by announcing his plan to go soft on a whole range of crimes in New York City. Hannah Myers of the Manhattan Institute joins me after the break. Stick with us. So who needs soft on crime judges when the district attorney won't even lock up the bad guys? As we reported earlier, Manhattan's new DA has ordered his prosecutors to stop seeking prison sentences for a whole range of different criminal offenses. He's going to downgrade felony charges in cases including armed robberies and drug dealing. And this is according to a set of progressive policy directives that have been made public as of Tuesday. The move sparked immediate outrage from cops who said the policies will lead to more crime and shootings. For more on this, let's bring in Hannah Myers, director of the Policing and Public Safety Initiative at the Manhattan Institute. Hannah, good to see you.
Great to see you, Buck. Thank you for having me.
So in an accompanying day one letter to his staff, Bragg claimed that these policy changes not only will in and of themselves make us safer, they will also free up prosecutorial resources to focus on violent crime. I don't know. I think that they should take a pretty tough approach to things like armed robbery with a firearm, but that's just me.
I I agree. It's so sad because Mayor Adams is coming in saying he's going to reduce gun violence. He's going to make New York City streets safe for business and for citizens. And these policies are going to make that impossible in Manhattan and reverberating out to the other boroughs. Essentially, Monday, it's open season for commercial burglaries. You can walk into a Duane Reade or a mom and pop shop and just rob them at knife point or with a hypodermic needle. You can punch the clerk or the owner in the face and you're not going to go before a judge. You're not going to have jail time. And you basically have the option whether you're even going to be prosecuted. And it's going to just make these crimes increase so much more and traumatize New York City businesses that are already suffering from the COVID epidemic and so much else. It's incentivizing crimes like resisting arrest and fare evasion and not showing up to court because he's telling his office, don't prosecute these things. So if you're getting arrested and you don't want to be, you might as well resist because nothing's going to happen. You're in the subway, you don't want to pay, you might as well jump the turnstile because there's no penalty. And if you don't want to show up to your court date, don't, because nothing's going to happen to you. It's sending the wrong message. It's making communities less safe by saying he's not going to prosecute prostitution and low-level drug dealing. Well, no New Yorker wants prostitution and drug dealing in front of their home or their business or their school. It's like saying if we just infuse crime and criminality, into our communities, everyone's going to be safe, which is bonkers.
So Hannah, can you just walk us through this for a second? Because anybody hearing this at home would immediately think that this is just, honestly, it's just crazy. Like this doesn't even make any sense. What is the supposed, for this new DA who's come in, and obviously New York City is getting a lot of attention on the crime front because of the rise in shootings and violent crime, particularly over the last 18 months or so. What is his argument really supposed to be, and why would someone in his role do this? Like, who is he trying to please other than perhaps criminals by saying, we're not going to send you to prison? Carceral sentencing is what they keep saying about this. We're not going to send you to prison, even for things like, armed robbery is a serious crime. We're not just talking about jaywalking here.
Right. This is, a lot of firearm possession cases. The amount of things that you can be jailed for under the new sentencing guidelines are very small. I think the generous interpretation of the thinking here is that whereas we know, because we've seen, especially in the last 18 months since New York State bail reform was passed, there's an incredibly high rate of rearrest for people prosecuted for all sorts of crimes, arrested for all sorts of crimes, rates that are up to 68% for, like misdemeanor burglaries, and 25% of those new arrests are violent felonies. And you see it across the board if you look at, the New York State Unified Court System data. But Alvin Bragg's, his approach and what he says in the memo and the data that he looks like says, well, you can just choose to not convict people, not prosecute people, not incarcerate people, and it has no impact on crime. But that's looking at the data in a very skewed and misleading way, because in fact, prosecution and conviction and incarceration do reduce crime, and arrests do reduce crime. And we're going to see that tragically, as these policies go into effect. A lot of people don't think deeply about prosecution, and so it's easy for the large backers. George Soros gets mentioned a lot because this is a very effective way to change legislation sort of unofficially by putting in place a local prosecutor who has this kind of discretion to choose not to prosecute crimes. And when people go to vote, they don't necessarily realize the impact of these policies as much as maybe they do for policing. That's sort of more in front of people.
You touch on something, Hannah, and I've been asked this. I've had people call into my radio show and asking this. Why is George Soros, who is involved, and this is just a follow the money situation, he's given substantial sums of money to district attorney races across the country in major cities that have these progressive prosecutors then in a place where they get to make these decisions. Why is Soros, people ask me this, why would he do this? How could somebody think that this is going to, or what, let's put it this way, what is he trying to achieve by helping to get these progressive prosecutors into these roles?
A lot of people really think that the more compassionate approach is to simply allow people not to prevent anyone from going to jail, to give everyone the option of different kinds of diversion programs or non-prosecution or decriminalization. And the fact of the matter is that it's not supported by data, and it's part of a huge trend in not thinking about the victims of crime. The victims of crime who are so overwhelmingly Black and Hispanic, especially in the city. You know, they make up, their 20% of the city is Black, and 74% of shooting victims, 68% of murder victims are Black. Hispanics, it's like 25% for each, even though they're a minority in the city. And I think we have to balance our well-intentioned and good and important compassion for offenders, and in being intelligent about different options on the table, being cognizant of substance abuse problems and mental illness, and what kind of supervised programs we can put people into rather than just into jail if they need other help. But we have to remember that crimes have victims, all crimes, be it a shoplift or a shooting like you're showing in that devastating video there. That's someone's family that's hurting. And, it's very easy for people at a remove like George Soros or a lot of the politicians who can afford their own private security to feel like they're doing the right thing. But we got to go back to the people of this city and the people who are the most vulnerable, who are scared for their kids to go to school because of the doubling of shootings last year and the 50% rise in murder.
Do you foresee any tension between this district attorney, Bragg, and the incoming or the now mayor of New York, Eric Adams, whose primary mission, at least according to most of what's being talked about around him, is to clean up crime in the city?
So far, Eric Adams has really gone out of his way to show brotherhood for Bragg, certainly in the campaign, where he has the right idea, where we see the eye to eye, but this is really going to come to loggerheads because even Adams has been outspoken that it's a bad idea to not try to seek jail sentences for firearm arrests, because then criminals don't take it seriously. They walk out with their firearms. So I think when the rubber hits the road, Adams has a big investment in making the city safer. These policies absolutely prevent that. And so there's going to have to be some kind of a confrontation, at least at the policy level. So we'll see what the rhetoric is around that.
Hannah, thanks for being with us. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks, Buck.
A snowy morning in Virginia led to a nightmare for motorists on Interstate 95 recently, with some commuters being trapped in their cars for over 24 hours. We're going to take a look at the fallout. How did this happen? With the First TV's Tina Lowe when we come back. As hundreds of motorists were stranded for hours on Interstate 95 in Virginia this week, many on social media were quick to blame Republican Glenn Youngkin, who was elected the Commonwealth's new governor in November. Just one problem: Youngkin won't be sworn in until January 15th. So that leaves the highway mess in the hands of lame duck Democrat Ralph Northam. The nicest thing that's been said about Northam in a long time. The errors were immediately noticed by other social media users who were quick to point out that Northam was still, in fact, in charge. For more on this, let's bring in Tina Lowe, discuss this and other things, commentary writer at the Washington Examiner. Tina, hello.
Hey, Buck.
So left-wing journo Eric Boehlert originally took to Twitter to describe the I-95 standstill. Here's what he said: the beginning of the Youngkin era in Virginia. He quickly and quietly deleted the tweet, of course. Special thanks to the critics who shared a screenshot of the post. Ralph Northam puts the blame on Virginia drivers, saying people need to pay attention. This was reported by Fox News. Outgoing Democratic governor points finger at Virginia drivers for getting stuck. Okay, what the heck happened here? And why is this a mess beyond the actual traffic jam mess?
So DC may not be Minnesota, but we do tend to have at least one legitimate snowstorm every year. So it's not like this never happens. This isn't some unprecedented event. My understanding is that two big factors made this somewhat of an inevitability. One, it's not the county governments that maintain the highways. It's Virginia state. So Northam is quite literally responsible for that. You have fewer amount of staffers because it is just the Virginia Department of Transportation responsible for overseeing the third largest highway system in the country. Virginia has third largest highway system of any state in the country. And then also, rather than using rock salt, they use a liquid solution that includes sodium chloride, aka table salt, but it's liquid. So, DC will rain usually before it will snow, and that evidently washes it away. And with regard to blaming Virginia drivers, look, I'm from California and I've now lived in the DMV for over 3 years. Yeah, I can attest to the fact that the DMV drivers are not good. But that being said, it is not the job of the governor to blame the drivers when one of the drivers includes not only his own senator, Tim Kaine, but, the running mate for his party just 5 years ago. And you're just blaming the drivers. You had people on Twitter saying that they needed insulin, people who didn't have food or water, and it was freezing out there. And, so luckily, as much as the Biden administration loves their electric vehicles, people were really thankful to have cars that run on fuel because they were able to turn on the heater, shut it, maintain. Whereas the electric cars did all get stranded. And luckily, I don't think that any lives have been reported to be lost. But it still is appalling. The Pentagon is right there and there was no military detail deployed. And, they were relying on the kindness of strangers, people who just fellow citizens who just went through to the highways to distribute food, to make sure that kids were safe. And so it's a miracle that this didn't wind up costing lives.
I mean, Twitter also pounced on some of what President Kamala Harris tweeted. She said the U.S. was moving again. That was her tweet, as thousands of people were stranded on Interstate 95 in Virginia. Because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, she wrote, America's moving again. That's what infrastructure is all about, getting people moving. Well, not so much on I-95.
No, and if you've ever actually driven the I-95, the only freeway that challenges it for being worse is the 405 in terms of, traffic, but also just not only always having new renovations, but those renovations never being concluded because they don't pay these employees overtime. So, at 6 or 7 o'clock, it's not uncommon to see parts that are supposed to be under construction with no one working on it. When, there was actually this, pandemic once upon a time that would have been a great opportunity to work on a lot of this infrastructure. Kamala, as always, being her charming, relatable self, realizing that if you have Air Force 2, yeah, maybe you're moving, but the rest of your current home area is stuck.
Tina, switching gears here for a moment. Starting tomorrow, all Chicago Teachers Union members at Chicago Public Schools will be teaching remotely. This was taken from the Chicago Teachers Union Twitter account. The action will end when one of the following conditions is met: the current surge in cases substantially subsides, or the mayor's team at CPS signs an agreement establishing conditions for return that are voted on and approved by the CTU House of Delegates. I think this is a good thing. I like that this is happening in a sense, Tina, because it is showing anyone who is paying attention that teachers' unions, whether in Chicago or really anywhere else in the country, do not give a you-know-what about kids and just want to be paid to stay home while everything else in Chicago is open, but not the schools. Too dangerous to teach, not too dangerous for other people that have jobs.
I think it's pretty clear, and we've known since, if not March 2020, April 2020, that kids, thank God, not only are avoiding the risk of severe disease from COVID, but also they are not primary vectors of transmission, meaning they aren't even really carrying this virus. And, the public health officials pushed to make sure that teachers were prioritized, not only just for their first vaccines, but also for boosters. At this point, it's either you have natural immunity, or you've gotten vaccinated, or you don't care. So it's this farce that we need to shut down schools for safety. It is not safety. If you look at the increase in suicide attempts and suicidality, teenage girls, suicidality up 51% from pre-pandemic. Also a lot of millions of students rely on public schools for nutrition. They're losing that access. How many of these students don't have access to iPads or computers? This is Chicago we're talking about. There are a lot of poor children. And it's funny how the crowd that always likes to call things racist and sexist refuse to admit that this harms brown and black children the most because they're the most reliant on the public school system, and also working moms who cannot accommodate this. They're supposed to go
Looks like
into work.
The Biden administration hasn't really come down too hard on this. It's so interesting. The unvaccinated, of course, are a constant threat to everybody.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the teachers' unions are heroes because they're too lazy and corrupt to do their jobs. That's interesting.
Yeah, and Buck, what other union goes out of the way to point out how useless they are in society? You don't see coal miners doing this. You don't see workers in the automotive industry. You don't even see, the diversity, equity, inclusion types in the managerial class that on college campuses arguing that they're unnecessary. And yet, the Chicago Teachers Union is sending a very clear signal. They don't need to actually do their job. Their jobs do not matter. And if that's the case, I think you're going to see a lot of parents, regardless of their political persuasion, want to wrest control back from the unions, because it's becoming this massive, not just economic burden, but a clear mental health crisis among our children. And, I'm a big proponent of vaccines, but let's just point out that an unvaccinated 18-year-old, statistically speaking, has a much, much, much lower risk of death than a fully vaccinated 30-year-old. This thing is, exponential in terms of its risk with regards to age. So the children they aren't the ones at risk. This isn't about protecting them. This is about using government control to get a paid taxpayer-funded vacation.
It's grotesque, but it's not surprising to anybody who knows anything about the commie teachers unions and what they're really up to. Tina, stay safe. Good to see you.
Thanks, Buck.
All right, coming up, comedian Patton Oswalt bends to the woke mob and throws his buddy Dave Chappelle under the bus in the process. We'll have that story and more in Quick Hits. Stay with us. Ron Klain said in 2020 that Biden would use his power to reverse COVID-19 testing shortages. And disingenuous comedian, is he funny? Patton Oswalt bends the knee to cancel culture, of course, because they all do. Let's get into Quick Hits. All right, let's just first start with this. The Biden regime has made all kinds of promises that they obviously cannot and have not kept when it comes to COVID. That much is clear, right? I mean, they were going to shut down the virus, not shut down the economy. That was Joe Biden. Hey, I'm gonna shut down the virus. I'm not going to shut down the economy. That's what he's yelling everywhere, right? But has he shut down the virus? And how's the economy doing, by the way? Turns out, yeah, we were sold a bill of goods, at least those people that voted for the guy. I did not, obviously. But let's just remember something here. They also promised to fix the problems around testing. Now, they're obsessed with testing. They seem to think that if we test enough, we're going to stop this, or we're going to save a lot of lives, or it doesn't really work that way. I mean, the testing tells you if you have it. By the time you get tested, you've probably already given it to somebody else if you're highly contagious. And so what are we even really doing? What is being accomplished by all this? Well, here's White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain on Biden's plan to fix what he called Trump testing fiasco. Watch.
The Biden plan starts with fixing Trump's testing fiasco. He'd make sure that all Americans have access to regular, reliable, and free testing. He'd double the number of drive-through tests, and he'd hire 100,000 or more contact tracers to make sure we're finding cases of the disease.
Yeah, so we're going to find those cases, right? Because we got 1 million a day in this country right now. So, we're really tracking them all down. We're not even finding a majority of the ones that are happening. But there's also a big testing backlog. What happened to that? They didn't know that we were going to go into a winter phase here because they thought the shot was going to stop you from getting infected and spreading it, and they were wrong. And so they didn't prepare. So they're unprepared, and it's on them, but you won't see the media talking about it that way, will you? No, of course not. Is there anything these days that, when it comes to COVID, is too stupid for the libs? Like, is there anything that you'd say they can't do that thing, that's too dumb? Before you answer that question, think about some of the things that are going on. You got kids in band practice in individual bubbles. Well, here's a TikToker who's telling everybody that at his company, people, this is amazing, people are forced to wear masks during Zoom meetings with each other. Watch this.
I work from home, and today my boss sent an email saying that the whole team needs to wear masks during our Zoom meetings because one of the employees has a fear of unmasked people. Like, I'm trying to be respectful, but for everyone asking about the email from my boss, here it is.
Yeah. You gotta Zoom on Skype or whatever, mask rather on Skype or Zoom or whatever it is. Because, maybe the droplets will go through the internet electrons or something and find you. Where's Fauci on this one? Oh, of course, he's never going to say. He's too much of a coward to ever say this is crazy. Anyway, Patton Oswalt has written, speaking of cowardice, a long groveling apology in the form of an essay after posing in a photograph with his former friend, I suppose, comedian Dave Chappelle. Here's just a snippet of what he wrote on his Instagram page. I'm an LGBTQ ally. I'm a loyal friend. I'm sorry, truly sorry I didn't consider the hurt this would cause or the depth of that hurt. Oh my gosh. I posed for a photo with my friend, who is perhaps the most prolific and successful black comedian of his generation. You're not allowed to do that anymore? Kind of bizarre, isn't it? Keep in mind also, if you go back, you'll find that Patton Oswalt used to have some really un-PC jokes about the trans community, but he's not going to apologize for that. Well, he probably will, actually. Who knows? Biden suggests Americans use Google to find COVID tests. Watch this.
Google, quote, COVID test near me. Go there, Google, COVID test near me on Google to find the nearest site where you can get a test most often and free.
The decrepit buffoon really is, it's embarrassing. It's sad and embarrassing. Thanks, Democrats. Good job. Anything but Trump. Well, we're seeing what that looks like. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.